Well, good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have you here this evening. Welcome to the virtual workshop on the Climate Resilient SD, Preparing for Climate Change. My name is Erica Manuel. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Institute for Local Government, or ILG. ILG is working with the City of San Diego to facilitate tonight's activities, and we are so excited to see all of you tonight. This week, we're actually going to be celebrating Earth Day, which is held every year in April. And for us Californians, we live in such a beautiful state that many of us are able to enjoy the beauty of our communities year-round. But if you've lived in California for a little while or your whole life like me, you might have noticed that our climate is changing a bit, and it's impacting our everyday lives. I don't know if you remember this, but we used to get 1 or 2 bad fires a year up and down the state. And maybe now you've noticed how we get hundreds of fires all over California every year that start as early as April and maybe go until November or December. And you might remember how bad the air can get for how long we see and smell that smoke every year. And you might have also noticed that we're getting less and less rain and how it's getting warmer and warmer every year too. We're definitely headed for another drought in California. And yesterday, I think it hit 80 degrees in San Diego in April. So one thing that we do know is that everything connects to everything else. So when it's smoky outside, it's not always safe to go to work or to send your kids to school. They can't play outside. You can't take the family to the park. You may not be able to ride your bike. You might have asthma and you don't feel well. Your quality of life, your homes, your jobs, your families, all of those are impacted by these issues. And that's why we're here today. Understanding how climate impacts our everyday lives is really important. Planning for changes that are going to affect you and your family, that's important. Making sure that everyone in San Diego has a chance to hear from the city about what they're doing to protect your community and your neighbors is important. And making sure that you have a chance to share your perspective and your experiences and your priorities with the city, that's really important too. And that's why we're here today and why we're so excited that you could join us. And we're also grateful to the City of San Diego for hosting this workshop and allowing ILG to be a part of it. Your ILG facilitation team today includes 2 people that I want to quickly introduce, Carly Brown, who's waving, I think, and Hannah Stelmakovich, she's also waving. And before we get started with our formal program, I want to quickly make sure that I turn the mic over to Hannah, who's going to begin by sharing some of the basics of our technology and walking you through some of the important information you will need to participate in today's session.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica, and good evening, everyone. If we can please advance to the next slide. Okay, so today's workshop is offered in 2 languages, in English language and in Spanish channel. If you're just new to interpretation services on Zoom and you don't know how to join Spanish channel, we're going to provide the same instructions in Spanish in just a moment. But first, let me go over the English instructions. On the bottom of your screen, you're going to see interpretation globe. And on the screen of your computer, you see the sign circled. You're going to click on that globe and you're going to select Spanish channel, the orange arrow that points out. Again, you're going to click on the interpretation globe. In the pop-up menu, you're going to select Spanish channel. And there's one more step we're asking you to do. You're going to mute original audio. In this way, you're only going to hear Spanish translation. If you are on the tablet or on the iPad and you do not see interpretation globe on the bottom of your screen, please just touch the bottom of your screen and you're going to see the pop-up menu and you should see the sign. And if you have any questions, any difficulties, technical difficulties, please use the Q&A box, Q&A feature, Zoom feature, and send the question to our tech team that will help you to resolve your issues in real time. And I'm going to pass it to Vanessa, who is going to provide the same instructions in Spanish. And then we're going to pause for just a moment to make sure our Spanish-speaking participants are not asking any troubleshooting questions in real time that we need to resolve before we move on. Vanessa? Vanessa, you're on mute, maybe.
Thank you, Ana. Buenas noches al público. Yo les quiero proporcionar esta noche las instrucciones para que ustedes puedan participar de manera activa en el seminario web por medio de Zoom. Si ustedes no están familiarizados con el servicio de interpretación por Zoom, es muy sencillo programarlo. Si se fijan en la parte de abajo de la ventana del programa, hay un globo terráqueo y ahí dice interpretación. Si ustedes hacen clic en este globo terráqueo, les va a aparecer un menú con unas opciones, inglés y español. Si ustedes desean escuchar en español, tienen que seleccionar donde dice el idioma español para escuchar en el idioma que quieran ustedes seleccionar. Y tampoco no olviden silenciar el micrófono para que no se escuche el ruido de fondo. Y si tienen alguna pregunta durante la reunión, por favor utilicen la función de preguntas y respuestas. Si tienen alguna dificultad técnica, por favor, utilicen esta función de pregunta y respuesta. Muchas gracias.
Great. Vanessa, if you can stay with us on the line for just a moment. If you have any technical difficulties, if you cannot connect to the Spanish channel, please use the Q&A box and we'll wait for maybe just a moment to see if any questions are coming in. We can address in real time. So thank you.
Sorry. Si tienen alguna pregunta o alguna dificultad, como les decía, por favor utilicen la función de pregunta y respuesta que se encuentra en la parte de abajo de la pantalla y ahí pueden hacernos llegar sus dudas o comentarios o si tienen alguna dificultad o cualquier pregunta que tengan, este es el momento para dirigir las preguntas a los panelistas para que les puedan brindar ayuda.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, I see no questions in regards to Spanish translation, so I hope our Spanish participants are all set. Vanessa, if you can translate that, and we will activate your translation lines as well.
Entonces, como no vemos ninguna pregunta, entonces ya vamos a dar inicio y como les repito, ahí está disponible la función por si tienen alguna duda de pregunta y respuesta.
Thank you, Vanessa. Okay, this is preparing for climate change workshop. Next slide, please. In this workshop, we're going to learn about climate adaptation and resilience planning efforts that the city is currently pursuing. And this is what we're hoping to achieve with this particular workshop. We would like to hear from you on your preference on climate adaptation actions and what actions the city can take, solutions can provide that benefit your community when you're preparing for climate change and climate threats. We also would like to share feedback and input that the city has released so far because these planning efforts have been happening for several months now. So there has been initial feedback and input specifically on goals and priorities as it relates to climate resiliency planning and adaptation planning. We would like to hear from you today, your feedback on additional actions and additional strategies that can help this community to adapt to and respond to climate change. And we would like to clarify Resilient San Diego, what we call resilient planning timeline, future engagement opportunities, and how can you provide additional feedback, not only today, but what are some additional engagement and feedback opportunities for you? And you can see the other two workshop goals on the following slide, informing about climate resilience San Diego planning process and sharing your feedback the city has received so far from the first survey. And to do that, this is our agenda for today. We're gonna do a quick welcome and introductions, which we're doing today. We're gonna set the stage. What do we mean by climate resilience San Diego? What this planning effort is all about? How did it come around? And what the city has been already doing and what type of feedback the city has been already hearing from you. Then we have a special guest from the community who will talk about their community and how climate impacts their communities and how they're experiencing climate change. We're going to also hear from you by using a variety of polling and surveying techniques and tools in this meeting. Then we're going to continue talking about strategies and solutions that the city has in mind, but would like to hear more on additional strategies and solutions. We'll describe what is already being considered and open the floor to additional suggestions. And then we're going to wrap up and talk about the next steps, specifically how else can you participate and what are the feedback opportunities moving forward. So this is our agenda for today. So how can you participate in this workshop? We're in this virtual environment. We are on Zoom platform, which is definitely not ideal platform for community engagement. But we're going to do our best today to ensure that you have a variety of options to participate. First of all, please use question and answer feature box, Q&A feature box. It's on the bottom of your screen. Again, if you do not see that box, if you're probably on the phone or iPod, sometimes you have just to tap on the bottom of your screen for that box to pop up. The city and the ILG team are monitoring the questions, and we will answer as many questions as times allow. We will pause to answer some of the questions during the meeting, clarifying questions about information that is being presented. And also at the end of the meeting, we will have a Q&A session where we'll address as many questions as we feasibly can, those questions that are related to adaptation, resilience, and climate action planning. And if we don't get to your question, which is possible, the city will follow up on questions related to the Climate Action Plan and Resilient San Diego. As I mentioned, this is a virtual environment, it's not ideal. It does not provide as many opportunities to participate as we would have had in person. But again, we did our best to integrate various polling and survey technologies to ensure that we can hear from you, your real-time thoughts about climate impacts as you're experiencing it, and what solutions would you like to see that would help you and your community to respond to and prepare for climate impacts. And as I mentioned, this is just one of the opportunities to engagement and share your feedback and input, and we will let you know how else can you participate moving forward. Next slide, please. And this is your behind the team logistics and polling team. As you can see, we are, the whole team is here to make sure you have a good experience with today's workshop. So Melissa and Nicole are our polling and logistics team. Okay, I think I've talked enough. Let's hear from you. We're going to launch a quick poll just to learn who is in the room.
Sorry, first we'd like to hear about you. We'd like to know, how long have you lived in San Diego? Is it less than a year, 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or more than 10 years? Please select one of these answers and we'll get to know each other a little bit. All righty, hopefully everyone's had a chance to answer that and we can go ahead and see those results. Oh, looks like we have a lot of long-term San Diegans. We had about 57% of you have lived for more than 10 years in the city. 17% has lived 5 to 10 years, another 17% 1 to 5 years, and just a couple of you less than 1 year. Great, let's go ahead and go to the next question. How did you learn about this workshop? Did you hear about it in a newsletter or an email from one of our nonprofit partners? Did you hear about it from a newsletter or an email from the city of San Diego? Did you learn about it from social media or just word of mouth? Or is there another way? Or are you not quite sure? If there's another way, you could go ahead and type that answer in the Q&A box so we can learn a little bit more about how we're getting people to come to the workshops. Just wait another minute here, put in your final results, and then we can see the results of the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll and see those results. Looks like a lot of you heard from a newsletter or the email from the city of San Diego, about 41%. Others heard about it on social media, 14% from a newsletter from a nonprofit. We have about 9% word of mouth. Another 9% is other, and we're seeing in the box via Surfrider. And a couple of you just aren't sure. Go ahead to the next question. How familiar are you with the Climate Resilient San Diego planning effort? So in this case, you can select all that apply. So we're looking to see if you took a survey earlier this year, maybe January or February, you took the first survey the city put out, or did you just take a survey recently in April? They released a second survey in April. Or did you visit the Resilient SD website? Did you read about it on social media? Or did you hear about it in the local newspaper? Or you just haven't heard much about it and you're here today to learn more? And again, you could go ahead and select all that apply. Alrighty, we could go ahead and close the poll and see how folks are engaging with this process. Oh, great. It looks like 37% of you did take the survey earlier this year, the first survey, and about another 11% of you did take the most recent one in April. But overwhelming 42% of you did visit the Resilient SD website. 11% also saw it on social media, and then another 11% heard about it in the social news. And about 26% of you haven't heard much about it, and you're here to learn more, and we welcome you and thank you for that. I do think we have one more question, or is that the end? Oh, one more question, and then we'll continue on. In this workshop, who are you representing? Are you just here to represent yourself as a community member in the city of San Diego? Or are you representing some governmental agency? Or are you representing the business community? Do you own a business or here on behalf of the business community? Or do you represent a nonprofit or a community-based organization? Again, if there's two of these that reflect you, feel free to select the one you most resonate with. Alrighty, and I think we could close that up and just see who's here. Great, we have just about 53% of you are representing yourselves, and as a community member of the city of San Diego, we have another 35 that are representing nonprofits or community-based organizations, and about 12% representing the business community. So we just want to welcome you all and thank you so much for participating tonight. And without further ado, I turn it back to Hannah.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla. I'm glad 42% of you visited the webpage, so you probably know where to find all the surveys related to this planning process. So as I mentioned, some of you are familiar with this planning process, some of you are less familiar. So let's get all on the same page what it is. What is climate resiliency planning? How is it connected to the climate action plans? Climate action, something that is already happening, changing climate is already happening with programs that can help to adapt to these changes. And let's talk about the city goals, how the city is pursuing this effort, and what are some engagement opportunities for you, not only today, but besides beyond this workshop. And I would like to introduce your city team, which you probably know, those two wonderful ladies, Heidi Von Bloom and Julia Chase, and they will take over to talk about climate resilient San Diego.
Thanks, Hannah. If you could advance to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you so much. And let me start by thanking everybody for joining us tonight. I want to first start by explaining what we mean by some key terms that we'll be talking about in tonight's workshop. These are not terms that normal people are familiar with, and we want to be sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So first, mitigation focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the worst potential impacts of climate change. Greenhouse gases trap heat from the sun, and too much of these gases can cause climate change. Mitigation is what the city's climate action plan addresses through measures such as reducing car travel, reducing energy use in buildings, and using more renewable energy sources. The point of mitigation is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Adaptation focuses on planning for and adjusting to the climate changes that are occurring despite these best efforts. Even if the city stopped all of our greenhouse gas emissions today, we know that we would still experience impacts from climate change. Adaptation looks at how to reduce the risks from this change that we know will occur. And finally, resilience is a term that we will be using a lot tonight. And so what does this even mean? When we talk about resilience, we are referring to our ability to not just withstand impacts of climate change, but also how well we are able to prepare for climate change, often in ways that can otherwise make meaningful improvements in our everyday lives. In other words, while we are adapting to climate change, resiliency means also making those things better in many different ways. Next slide, please. So why are we planning for climate resilience? Why are we doing all of this work on this? Planning for climate resilience is an opportunity to not just prepare for climate change impacts, but also to leverage early action to improve everyone's daily lives. Planning for climate resilience can help us achieve other goals, such as cleaner air and water, addressing existing inequities, providing greater access to green spaces, and protecting and promoting diversity of plants and animals. Planning for climate resilience allows a city to address climate risk while investing in projects that will provide other benefits to the city's residents. For example, living plant walls, green roofs, and more access to green spaces all provide a cooling effect during heat waves. And they also provide other benefits such as more recreational opportunities, cleaner air, and flood prevention. The need for a standalone climate adaptation plan to prepare for the impacts of climate change was identified in the city's climate action plan back in 2015. Together with the climate action plan, the city is planning for a more equitable, more sustainable community that is prepared for a changing climate, is ready to respond, and able to continue to improve everyday life for city residents. Next slide, please. Equity is a critical component of climate adaptation planning. More vulnerable populations are hit hardest by climate change with the fewest resources available to respond. As city plans for climate change, it is critical that communities of concern are prioritized to ensure that investments and resources are provided for those with the greatest needs. Communities of concern have been identified through the city's Climate Equity Index, which was developed with the assistance of the Equity Stakeholder Working Group to use various factors to assess relative access to opportunity from climate change. Areas with very low or moderate access to opportunity are considered to be communities of concern, and we know that they face the largest barriers and should be prioritized for investments. These areas are shown, it's a little bit hard to see on this map, but in the blue, light blue, and light turquoise census tracts on this map here. Equity needs to be and will be fully integrated into the development of the plan and be prioritized for plan implementation. Adaptation strategies, projects, and funding need to be focused where there is the greatest need, and we're excited to hear feedback from the public on how we can best achieve these goals. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia Chase, who's our Senior Resiliency Planner. So take it away, Julia. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. So what does the changing climate mean for the city of San Diego? Based off of best available science and research, we are able to understand what kinds of impacts to anticipate and plan for. There are 4 primary climate change hazards for the city: heat, wildfire, flooding and drought, and sea level rise. For heat, we know that we'll see a general rise in daily minimum temperatures, more frequent and longer heat waves, and an increase of warm nights. For wildfire, we know that climate change increases the risk factors for this hazard. Higher ambient temperatures, dry conditions, and a greater availability of fuel increases the likelihood of wildfires that will burn more intensely for longer. For flooding, precipitation is already highly variable in San Diego. We expect to see more variability and stronger swings between periods of drought and periods of heavy rain. When we do see precipitation events, they will be more extreme. For sea level rise, we know that we'll have a greater frequency of coastal flooding and an increase in coastal erosion. Next slide. What do we already know? The city has completed multiple studies to better understand the risk that heat, wildfire, flooding, and sea level rise pose to the city. This analysis helps us to better understand potential impacts by looking at where the climate change hazards will occur and what assets or resources it might impact. We've completed risk assessments that consider to what extent a resource would be able to continue to function and how it might be able to respond or adjust to changing conditions. From this, we're able to identify where there is greater vulnerability, as well as which assets or resources would benefit the most from adaptation strategies. This information helps the city build a range of potential adaptation strategy options. Adaptation strategies are actions, policies, or programs that address climate change-related risk or improve the city's or community's ability to respond to climate change. Adaptation strategies can be prioritized where there's the greatest risk, greatest vulnerability or need, or where the strategies would provide the greatest benefit to the community. Next slide. For Climate Resilient SD, we have 5 main goals to address the risk of climate change and to set a vision for a future thriving San Diego. Connect and inform our communities, support thriving natural environments, protect historic and tribal cultural resources, maintain critical city services, and build a resilient and equitable city. These vision and goal statements were shared with the public in our first survey for feedback and input to make sure there was a common vision for Climate Resilient SD. We will share the findings of the survey and the feedback we received shortly. Next slide. So here is our overall planning and engagement timeline. In early 2021, the first survey asked for feedback on the goals and visions of the plan, as well as for community concerns related to climate change. Thank you to everyone that shared your feedback. And remember, it's not too late. We still want to hear from you. We have a second survey out now in spring of 2021 that asked for feedback on potential adaptation strategies and community priorities. We're also holding this community workshop and working with various community groups. Over the summer, we plan to release a draft plan for public review and hold a second community workshop. We are very much looking forward to robust public input on the draft plan. And then by the end of this year, we are looking to bring the plan forward to City Council. Next slide. Why does your participation matter? A successful plan will be one that addresses the needs of the community. The climate change hazards are not new for our region. We've experienced wildfire, heat waves, and flooding already. With a better understanding of how a changing climate might have already impacted your daily life and what concerns you the most going forward, the city is able to tailor the adaptation strategies to speak to those needs and priorities. Community feedback received will help shape the Climate Resilient SD plan. The city aims to create a plan that reduces risk to communities and works towards a more resilient, sustainable, and equitable future, one where the strategies can improve daily lives for everyone in the city. Next slide. So as mentioned, we had a goals and visions survey. The first survey was released at the end of 2020. It included an overview of wildfire, extreme heat, flooding, and sea level rise, discussing how these hazards will intensify in the future and what potential impacts may be for San Diegans. The tool then presented the drafted goals and asked for participants to indicate their level of support for each goal. Participants were able to share their own experience with the effects of climate change in their community. This survey helps city staff ensure that the draft goals of the Climate Resilient SD plan are supported by the community and establish a common vision to move towards. Based on the responses to the survey and other feedback received, we see strong overall support for the goals of the Climate Resilient SD plan, particularly goals related to the environment, such as protecting environmental quality, increasing green spaces and natural shade, and protecting a diversity of plants and animals. There has also been strong support for prioritizing our vulnerable communities and building community preparedness. We also heard many common concerns around the increase of frequency of wildfires and the need to be prepared for them. We heard concerns about heat events and homes not being built for such conditions with the need for insulation or air conditioning. A common priority for many community members was planting more trees and increasing the natural shade cover. We also heard the need for better bike lanes and sidewalks to get around their communities. Another common topic was the desire for more community outreach and involvement. The findings from the first survey are being used to help guide and refine the suite of potential adaptation strategies. With the established goals, we can choose strategies that will support progress towards these goals. We can also make sure to develop strategies that address common areas of concern, such as the need to include and inform communities. Next slide. So now the city is seeking feedback on a range of potential strategies to address extreme heat, flooding, wildfire, and sea level rise. This survey provides an overview of potential strategies to address each of these climate change hazards, along with a summary table for each strategy that provides additional information on the cost, effectiveness, and general pros and cons for each strategy. We don't expect everyone to understand all of these strategies in a vacuum, so the table is really there to help everyone understand those pros and cons and be able to give an informed decision. You can rank your level of support for each strategy, provide input to what types of strategies you would most like to see in your neighborhood, and share information regarding how you may have been impacted in the past. For example, if a wildfire occurred, did you need to evacuate or did you suffer from poor air quality? We will cover some of this information tonight, but encourage you all to take the survey so that you can provide specific feedback to the city on your priorities for the adaptation strategies. We will also share contact information at the end, and you can always reach out to us directly. The survey is available on the city's resiliency webpage and in 5 languages: English, Spanish, Tagalog, Chinese, and Vietnamese. Next slide.
Yeah, Julia, if you want to wrap up before we move to the next segment of our presentation.
That's all I have.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Julia. Okay, so I think I'm going to recap just what we just heard, just to make sure that everyone really understood it. First thing, we learned about some common terms, right? The terms that are used and what those definitions are. And it's really important to make sure that everyone's kind of operating from the same concepts and understanding when we use terms that maybe aren't as something that you might use in your everyday life. We learned how to think about things like resilience and adaptation and equity. Those were described. We also heard a little bit about some of the threats that are facing San Diego right now, like the extreme heat, the sea level rise, the flooding, the wildfires. We also learned that the kind of research that the city's already done to better understand how vulnerable the city is and what the threats are to your community specifically. We heard a little bit about the goals of the climate resilient SD effort and the common vision that you have, because really these programs work really well when community input and visioning are all built together, so you all have a singular goal in mind and a plan in place. We also heard about the public engagement that's been done so far, what still remains to be done, and how the city really, really wants your input, including that survey that's open right now. And that survey is going to give you a summary of the climate-related hazards and some possible solutions or strategies that might be considered, and you can weigh in on that. You can rank your support, you can explain your priorities and other things as well. So you can provide feedback in a lot of different languages throughout, from what I understand, this summer, if I heard that correctly, and then the city is going to present the findings of all of these efforts towards the end of the year. I'll check in with the city team. Did I get all of that right, or did I misinterpret anything that I just said?
Thanks for the recap, Erica.
Cool. All right. Thank you all. And just a little recap to make sure that if you didn't catch all of that presentation, or if you came in and weren't quite sure, just wanted to make sure we made a quick recap for everyone so that we can move on to the part 2.
Great, thank you so much, Erica. And some of you are asking for the links to the survey number 2 on adaptation strategy. And I love your you being so proactive, because we are to ask you to take this survey on your own terms after this workshop, and we're planning to follow up with the link as well, but we are already dropping some of the links in the chat box. But please stay with us in this main channel, and because we will talk about adaptation strategies beyond just what is in survey, and we really want to hear from you about things that are beyond what's in the survey number 2. Okay, I'm just going to pause for just one moment before we go to Eddie and see if there's any questions that we can answer at the moment, or if we should continue. And I'm looking to my colleagues, Nicole, who would give me a sign to see if we want to take a question or two or address those questions a little later.
Yeah, Hannah, we do have one from Alfred asking about what proof do we have of climate change? You know, he's heard some concerns that some call climate change a myth. Could the San Diego team talk a little bit about that?
Julia, do you want to kind of give a high-level summary of what the climate change projections are we have and where we pulled our sources from for that information?
Yeah, so I spoke at a high level on each of the different primary climate change hazards. So for heat, knowing that we're going to see increased temperatures, more frequent heat waves. For flooding, that we're going to see this increase in variability in precipitation. And all of that information that I spoke to is from really well-established science and research at the state level, at the federal level, from local research institutions like Scripps. There's a fourth climate change assessment, which I can put the link in for in the chat, that looks at statewide projections for climate change hazards. And then there's a San Diego region specific report that looks at what specifically do we anticipate seeing in the San Diego region. So there's really a lot of science and research that backs up all of these trends and what we're anticipating going out into the future for heat, for wildfire, for sea level rise, and for flooding.
And if you and if you're really interested in it, we do have a bit additional information available on our website with what's called our vulnerability assessments. And in particular, there's one called a citywide climate change vulnerability assessment that has all of the data sources and the projections for climate change from the 4 identified hazards.
And one of the appendices, if you're really into it, is the climate hazards memo. And that goes like into all of the technical background of where for each of the different hazards, we're pulling that information. So depending on how into the weeds you want to get, we've got the information for you.
And maybe we can include those links in our follow-up surveys for those of you folks who would love to do additional research. Alfred, this is a good question. Thank you for asking. And I think a lot of people have this similar question on our minds. And this is a perfect segue into our next segment of this workshop. How do we know that climate change is happening? Well, there's definitely some scientific proof, but we're also experiencing as a community, no matter where you are in Southern or Central California, we're experiencing higher temperature, longer heats, we're experiencing more wildfires. And even though it's not burning next to you, it really impacts your air quality. And some of you probably are thinking about the last summer and how bad air quality from wildfires was all over in California. And we would like to hear from you. How do you experience change in climate? How community is experiencing, how those extreme temperatures, wildfires, bad air quality is impacting you and your community. And we thought, what would be better than to have Eddie Price, who is with the San Diego Urban Sustainability Coalition, share a little bit about his personal experience, but also what is he seeing and hearing from the community, because some of you may know Eddie, and next slide, please, and he is very involved and very engaged in the community and very, very passionate. So without further introductions, I would like to pass it to Eddie Price, who would share with us his story and his experience.
Go ahead and go off mute, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you. By the time I get done talking, some people might want me to go back on mute. You know, I'd first like to say and recognize that climate change in my community is not a priority, right? We worry about police shooting us and killing us, or our sons, or our brothers, or our daughters, and that's real. And I felt the need to let everybody know that, you know, if we're going to talk about climate change and communities of concern, we need to talk about from the outside, from the inside out instead of the outside in, right? Our solutions are always compared to solutions in other more vibrant communities. And so it gets difficult to even have the conversation inside of communities of concern. What I have noticed is that, you know, I moved down here from Northern California because of the sunshine. And the sunshine, you know, it doesn't last as warm anymore. And I might have to move to Cabo because I hear they got better weather down in Cabo. You know, my community is not really worried about sea level rise. We're not concerned about how many trees are in our community and all that kind of stuff. Because we have other stuff that are higher on the priority list, right? So my goal with the San Diego Urban Sustainability Coalition is to bring this issue home, right? And have these conversations in our community about this. And it's challenging because a lot of people, you know, they have other things going on. They're trying to get their kids back to school. They're having real life issues going on without worrying about icebergs melting in Greenland and raising the sea level. But we need to worry about that also. We need to worry about how we get served solutions in communities of concern. Case in point, National City has this amazing, interesting bike lane that goes down Euclid Avenue in Southeast San Diego, but it stops at the city of San Diego. And so, you know, in my mind, I'm looking at this bike lane. It's like, how come that doesn't extend all the way down Euclid Avenue? Well, that's because, you know, the two cities are not communicating on what's best for communities of concern. You know, to my point, it's a challenge having this conversation, and the challenge is bringing these concepts home, right? I was speaking with some folks from Environmental Health Coalition one day, and when there was a ship that was burning in the port of San Diego. And ironically, I knew the ship was burning because I live almost in Spring Valley and I could smell it, right? And so I was affected by it. Everybody over here was affected by it. But again, it's not our top priority. We just get a fan and keep it moving. But I do applaud the city and ILG for having events and situations like this, and the work that the city has done on the climate action plan and involving communities of concern, and understanding that communities of concern don't necessarily understand all of this, right? And that has been one of the biggest challenges, is getting the leadership in these communities to understand the necessity to be involved in these conversations. And it's just as crucial, in my humble opinion, as police shootings, is just as important as, you know, the issue with the Asian Pacific Islanders and all the things that they come up against recently, and, you know, for decades. You know, these once again, all these issues are on the same line, right? I was watching somebody posting about leaf blowers in the chat, and, you know, leaf blowers, though they may be detrimental to the air quality, that's real low on my list of priorities, because for one thing, those people are making money, and their economic, you know, it's tied to their economics. So to eliminate them is one thing, but to find a way to get them away from gas blowers into electric blowers may be the solution. You know, it's just from communities of concern standpoint, it's just finding different and better solutions. And that's a challenge because people have other things they'd rather talk about, or they have other concerns trying to get their kids back in school. How often does their kid go to school? But again, I still submit that climate change, and I don't know why I know any of this. I didn't go to school. I didn't learn nothing. You know, I think I might have graduated high school at some point in 1978, right? But I do know that this is important to the well-being of not only myself and my family and my community, but the well-being of the planet, right? And what we do here affects other countries and other parts of the world. And I don't know, you know, I'm not a tree hugger, but don't tell nobody, I have hugged a tree. And it actually felt kind of good, right? Because I wanted to see what a tree hugger really did. You know, so I'm curious about all this kind of stuff. And once again, I appreciate entities and organizations like this reaching out to my organization to see if we can participate in not only the issue, but the solution of the issue. Because whatever is done as far as the solution is concerned in La Jolla or Rancho San Diego or Poway, it's not going to work in a community of concern. And communities of concern are the element of success, right? Whether it's political, economics, or whatever. If you can't get communities of concern involved in the solution is not going to work. And that's just history. I don't know how long I'm supposed to talk. I guess somebody will text me and tell me to shut up, but I'm not going to shut up right now.
I was just going to do that, Eddie.
You were just about to text me?
Yes. No, thanks so much, Eddie. We do really appreciate you sharing. We appreciate your curiosity, and we appreciate you participating. I mean, I think it really resonates what you said. This may not be everyone's first thing they think about when they wake up in the morning. We know there are people who are struggling to put their kids in school, put food on the table, get to work on time, get their kids to practice and whatnot. And it doesn't seem like something that is immediate, but quite frankly, it is. I mean, I think we forget about it for 6 months out of the year, but when we are strangled by the wildfire smoke and we can't breathe in our communities, that does affect our ability to go to work. It affects if our kids have asthma or not. I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I know we talked about leaf blowers. There's a lot of things from small solutions to really big solutions. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. We want to understand everyone's experience. We want us to understand everyone's concern. But this really isn't a problem that we can think about in 10 to 20 years. We really need to start thinking about the actions and activities that we could do now. And that's why we're so appreciative that all of you came here tonight. Eddie, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And now we're going to hear, I think, a little bit more from our audience and how they've experienced climate change and what we can do to be more resilient. So thanks, Eddie, for joining us. And Hannah, I throw it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Eddie. And to hear from you, we're going to use polls everywhere. So what you see on the screen is instruction how to join polls everywhere. We're going to ask you to open another browser, another window on your internet browser, on your computer, your smartphone, or your tablet. You're going to get out of this window and you're going to open the new browser. And you're going to type pollev.com, pollev.com, and then you're gonna type a couple more letters. So I'm gonna pause for just a moment till you guys have a chance to open a new window. So you're gonna type pollev.com, you're gonna do / and you're gonna type SRESIL 685. If you're having difficulties getting in, try to toggle between two internet browsers windows. And I do want to acknowledge this is not super intuitive. This is not super quick and easy, but we are in a virtual environment. So we're trying to do our best so everyone can participate, every single person in this workshop. And if you have any troubles getting into Polls Everywhere, please type your question or your issue in Q&A box, and we'll try to troubleshoot in real time. Again, you're gonna type pollev.com / SRESIL 685. And I don't know if my colleague Melissa can see how many people already joined, but we can definitely test to see how many people are in with the icebreaker questions. So for you folks to get used to this technology. And on top of the screen, what you see on top of the screen is instructions how to get in case you are still getting in.
Yeah, so we'll just start with one question while people are still trying to get in. And while we're either finishing dinner, thinking about dinner, but I always like to think about dessert. So we're wondering today, what is your favorite dessert? Do you like pie? Are you more of a cake person? I know ice cream got me through most of the pandemic. My kids love cookies. And if you just don't like dessert, then good for you. Probably good on your waistline. If there's another one, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. As you can see that this polling is a little bit different. We'll see your answers in real time. And right now we're seeing that cookies and ice cream are tied at 30%, and also pie and those who don't like desserts are tied at 20%. So really we don't have any cake lovers, which is just shocking here. So enough of those questions. It looks like you all know how to use the software and your phones. And so we'll go ahead and go to the next question, which has a little bit more meat behind it. We're wondering what concerns you the most about climate change? And here you can go ahead and type in your answer. It can be anything. You can say, heat. It can be the wildfire smoke. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but think about, the things that Eddie said, the things we heard from Julia, and what are those, things that are most concerning to you? We're getting some responses in: the heat affecting poor areas, extreme weather conditions, sea level rise making our beaches disappear. We know that San Diego is definitely known for its beautiful environment and coastline. We have another one: extreme heat events and wildfire risks. Wildfires, environmental racism, and poor air quality. We have sea level drought, food insecurity, species extinction. As Erica mentioned earlier, we know everything's connected. We have an increased natural disasters and an increase in social inequality and unrest that will follow. Those are all something to definitely be concerned about. Environmental racism, unknown feedback loops, extreme weather conditions. Thank you all so much for sharing these concerns with us. Perfect. Okay, we'll go ahead and go to the next question. Again, the city is taking back in all of this feedback. So this will go in to think about priorities, really address the concerns, and make sure those strategies are addressing all of those. And so we're also seeing storms affect coastal access. Great. And now we're wondering, what do you think you need to be more prepared for climate change? You can go ahead and select the top few of these. I know there's a few choices here, but are you looking for more information about climate risks and how to protect you or your family? Are you looking about information about programs that can help you protect your property or your homes? Are you looking for more opportunities like this for community dialogue? Are you looking for better understanding about how community organizations can help you? I know a lot of community organizations really rallied during the wildfires and helped their communities. Or is there something else? Again, please feel free to drop those other answers into the Q&A box. But right now we're definitely seeing, kind of a tie for all the concerns. The front runner is more opportunities like this. So we're excited you're all here tonight and participating. We do have 28% of you guys saying other. I'm not seeing any of those dropped in the chat box just yet, but hopefully we'll find out what that other is. We're also seeing that 21% of you are looking for a better understanding about how community organizations can help. And then a little less important about the information about how you can protect you or your property. So this group is really thinking about the community as a whole, community dialogue, community-based organizations and their help and whatnot. So thank you guys so much for participating. We'll definitely make sure that that's integrated into the planning process and feedback. Okay, we can go ahead and launch the next.
I think this was the last.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the last question.
There will be more polling, folks, so do not close that window. Just switch to Zoom and keep that window open. We'll revisit that polling one more time so we can hear a little bit more from you. Okay, so now we're gonna go over climate adaptation strategies. Strategies, I know it's a big word, but what we mean by that, it's what types of programs, actions, activities can help to reduce those risks from climate change, those climate threats, climate hazards. And I think before going into that more in-depth climate adaptation strategies and actions, it would be nice to clarify what is the difference between climate resilient San Diego, which is climate adaptation and resilience plan, what is the difference with the climate action plan? There are two different plans and they're kind of happening on the similar timeline. And Julia or Heidi from the city of San Diego would like to clarify so we can all learn what's the difference.
Yeah, I'm happy to clarify. We've been getting a lot of good feedback and suggestions on some actions that our climate action plan focused. And I think it's just helpful to kind of go back to that slide that Heidi, we don't need to actually go back to it, but the slide that Heidi was talking about that had mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And so our climate action plan is really focused on how do we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So actions that are going to reduce emissions would be under our climate action plan. Our climate resiliency plan really identifies the need to make sure that we're prepared for climate change. So they're separate and they're distinct, but there are ways that they do overlap, and they are both planning in the climate planning realm. So it's easy to kind of confuse them. An example of one that overlaps is trees. This is kind of our classic example of trees sequester carbon. So it has a climate action benefit with regards to emissions, but trees can also provide a lot of benefits with regards to climate change impacts. So they provide a cooling effect that could help with extreme heat. They can also help prevent against rainwater runoff, so they can be a flooding strategy. So there are ways that there are strategies that would be applicable to both, but I think it is helpful just to note that they are two different efforts. They're kind of sister plans.
Great, thank you, Julia, for clarifying. The way I think about it, and Julia, correct me if it's wrong, climate action plan, to prevent future greenhouse gases. What can we do so there's less greenhouse gases in the future? We emit less. Climate adaptation and resiliency, we already emitted greenhouse gases and now they are in the atmosphere. So how can we do as a community to adopt and bounce forward with existing threats caused by this increased greenhouse gas, and how can we become more resilient? This is how I think about it.
And Hannah, if I can just add that the climate action plan is being handled by the sustainability department, but just so that we don't seem entirely too bureaucratic, we do closely coordinate with the department. They're actually also listening into this workshop. And so any questions you have related to climate action planning, we can also answer those questions and coordinate with the other department as well. So it's sort of one of the same, think of the city as the city, and we'll get you where you need to go. So thank you.
Great. Well, Julia, continue. Tell us about climate threats and some of the adaptation strategies.
Sure. So we are developing a suite of adaptation strategies, or as Hannah said, you can think of them as actions, policies, programs that will address and lower the risk to a changing climate, help us maintain critical city services, and focus on building stronger, more resilient communities. Tonight, we'll review some of the strategies that are applicable to each of the climate change hazards. More information on these is available online in the survey, where you can provide specific feedback on what you would like to see prioritized. So first, we'll cover heat. Climate change will mean not only more hot days, but that the hottest days are projected to get hotter and occur more often. There are many strategies to address heat. Some of these include green roofs, where existing rooftops are covered with plants or vegetation. This provides cooling for the building and the area around it. It can also provide stormwater benefits by absorbing rainwater. Cool roofs, which are light colored or reflective roofs, these can reduce peak energy demand and provide energy savings. Increase in tree canopy cover. This is a low-cost strategy that provides a strong cooling effect, can help improve air quality and water quality, and offset carbon emissions, but it does require maintenance. Shade structures, like the one pictured here, increase shaded areas. They are a low-cost addition to public parks and playgrounds and expand the area for outdoor activities on hot days. Another strategy is cool zones. These are where you utilize existing buildings and designate them as a cool zone location. They're equipped with AC and resources to help the community during a heat event. And they're also really helpful in protecting public health. Next slide. For flooding and drought, as I mentioned before, we anticipate greater variability. So more variability in the rainfall from year to year, and a more intense transition between times of drought and flooding events. There are a variety of strategies to address this. Some include raising roadways. This is an expensive strategy, but it does maintain access to location and protect public health and safety, particularly if the road was an emergency access road. Community engagement. This could be outreach in advance of a flooding event or information on water conservation. These can help to reduce peak flows and help conserve water. It's also good for improving water quality. Reactive maintenance could be things like positioning sandbags to address flooding. This is a low-cost strategy with flexible implementation, but it is a short-term solution that requires continuous operational support and staffing. For green infrastructure, there's a range of solutions. It can be anything from permeable pavement, green streets, green roofs, rain gardens, tree canopies, and green infrastructure strategies are really helpful in reducing flooding, but they also provide additional benefits such as heat mitigation, improving water quality, and community greening. Next slide. For wildfire, climate change will increase all the key drivers of wildfire, so high temperatures, dry conditions, and flammable vegetation. San Diego is projected to experience greater wildfire risk and greater severity. Strategies that address this include vegetation management. So this is removing brush that is the fuel for the fire. This makes fires easier to manage and protects public health and safety. It does require ongoing maintenance, so continuous management. Community outreach, such as providing information on fire prevention. This can help to reduce ignitions and prepare communities to be fire ready, also helping to protect public health and safety. Land use planning can be used to address wildfires, so not adding development in high wildfire risk areas. This can reduce the extent to which wildfires cause costs or losses to communities. And then finally, post-fire treatments. So this wouldn't be a fire prevention, but it would be a recovery strategy, such as mulching, that helps to prevent erosion and protect water quality. Next slide. And then finally, sea level rise. We know that sea level rise will cause an increase in both coastal flooding and coastal erosion. There are a variety of strategies to address this. Regulation options, so updating development regulations to lessen the risk and improve the ability of built structures to respond or withstand climate change. These can be tailored to be long-term and to be site-specific to prepare development for the impacts from sea level rise. Beach nourishment, or placing sand on the beaches, can help maintain beach access. It is effective in the short term, but as new sand will need to be added regularly and can be washed away in large storms, it's not a long-term solution. Seawalls, or hard barriers to rising seas, are another potential strategy. These are effective protection for the height that the seawall is designed for, but they do result in the loss of the beach because the sea level rise will then erode away the beach. Land use changes, so this could be something where you alter the use to be one of less intensity. Again, it can be tailored for that specific site and help to protect habitat and maintain beach access. There's also a whole range of nature-based solutions that can be implemented. These can be things such as living shorelines, wetland restoration, dune restoration, building these native oyster reefs, or waterfront parks. For nature-based solutions, we see a lot of additional benefits, such as helping to mitigate flooding, reduce wave energy, offset carbon emissions, improve water quality, and protect habitat. So all of these strategies and more information than I just went over is online on that survey. So you can go through and kind of dig into each of those a little bit more and learn more about them. And we really do encourage everyone to take the survey because we want to get your feedback on what strategies and what pathway forward you would want to prioritize. With that, I will hand it back to you, Hannah.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. So Julia outlined several actions, several strategies that potentially can help address climate threats and make it a little bit easier for the community to adopt and move forward, bounce forward from extreme heat, wildfires, flooding, sea level rise. We're not going into much details on individual strategies right here in this workshop, because the city of San Diego put a beautiful survey for you, which actually provides educational component where you learn about in each individual strategy and some of the ideas that would help you to prioritize what would benefit most you and your community. So at the end of the workshop, we would like you to take the survey, or tomorrow. But what we would like to do for the remainder of the workshop is continue this conversation with you. How do you experience climate threats? And what are some additional solutions that are not part of the survey? Some of the additional solutions that would really work for you and your community. And I would like to say thank you to Dawn, who gave me a great suggestion saying, Hannah, it's really hard to get to this survey and toggle between two windows. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I don't know why I haven't thought about putting the link in the chat box in the first place, how to get to the survey. So if you close that survey window, it's quite all right. I'm gonna put a link into Q&A so everyone can get to the window and participate in the next round of survey. Okay, I'm just going to give you a moment to log in if you haven't had a chance to. And Carly will lead another round of questions.
Great. And while Melissa and Nicole are loading up those questions, I just want to say thank you to all of you who've been putting comments in the chat and questions. And it seems like you guys are really versed in, a lot of this is in the details. So we had Paul comment on how creating more dense housing may decrease the urban tree canopy. And while Brenda noted that one of promising wildfire strategy may actually be to promote infill development, and other folks are commenting on who's going to water the trees. So as you can see, these are very complex issues. Even what is seemingly simple solutions have many layers to them. So I really want to thank everyone who's putting their insights in the chat box and the question box, because it does really show that you guys really understand the complexity of what we're dealing with here. So appreciate all of that. And then let's go ahead and get that next question launched. So what we're asking, Julia proposed a bunch of solutions. We want to hear what other solutions would benefit you or your community the most. And again, go ahead and pick the few that most resonate with you. Do you want to collaborate more with local nonprofits? Do you need more spaces for bike and walking? Do you want to back up energy solutions such as microgrids or generators? Do you want to invest in community garden programs? Are you hoping for more educational resources on climate change impacts? Are you looking for more community trainings on emergency response? Are you more interested in rainwater collection programs such as rain barrel rebates or whatnot? Climate change education for our youth? Or are local farmers markets of interest to you? Or really how to protect open and natural spaces? Or is there something else that you're really thinking about?
And with this question, you can select up to 5 options. So we're not asking you to choose 1 out of 10. So please take your time, read through all these options and select up to 5. Let us know what benefits you and your community the most.
Yeah, one of the most challenging things in creating these plans is just to have enough strategies that the city can actually pursue without having everything in the world, because we know if you have too many things to do, you never really get to any of them. So they're really trying to narrow it down with questions like these. And as people are starting to implement their answers and insert their answers, we are seeing that backup energy solutions is one of the top, again, with protecting open and natural spaces. It seems that more spaces to bike and walk is also of interest to the community. Maybe the second tier, I'd say, go ahead and put in the climate change education for the youth, as well as educational resources on climate change impacts. And I think those are closely followed by community trainings on emergency response, as well as rain barrel or rainwater collection programs. And then a little less support for collaborate with local nonprofits, community garden programs, and local farmers markets. But it's all really neck and neck, but definitely more interest in protecting open and natural spaces, more spaces to bike and walk, and backup energy solutions. So thank you all. We will take that to heart and make sure that the city inserts that in its plan. Feedback is always very important. We have folks writing, education's important, but not a solution. They really want actions. They want actionable, tangible things. So now we just want to know what's missing. What other solutions would benefit you or your community most? And again, this is one of those open-ended questions. We're asking for your solutions. Eddie always says, some people don't feel that they created climate change. So why is it their responsibility to come up with the solutions? That is absolutely fair, Eddie. But we think about this a lot. We research this a lot. I know the city, Julia and Heidi have done tons of work on this. We find some of our best solutions from community members. So I know you guys are putting a ton of things in the chats. We will also make sure that those are included in the feedback from tonight's solution. But we're hoping right now that you can type some of those, what are we missing? So we're already seeing pop up here, kelp farming and ocean restoration, obviously extremely important for the city of San Diego and its beautiful coastline. Building electrification, and that's something I know that is a big topic in the climate action plan. An increase for affordable housing through infill and compact development. Yes, resilience is definitely considering the overall health and well-being of our community members, and having safe, affordable housing is one of those things that's very important. Someone else just typed in results-oriented solutions, investing in infrastructure that is carbon neutral or carbon negative. Great. Keep those coming. Let's see, we have a few more here coming up. Trying to toggle back and forth between the chat and this, and have less stop signs and traffic lights. I'm assuming that's to address car idling. And again, really trying to find the balance between safety, health, resilience, greenhouse gas reductions. These are all things, cost effectiveness. These are all things that we need to think about when selecting any of these strategies. City development that encourages low carbon methods of transportation, banning leaf blowers. We see a lot of conversation with that in the chat as well. We could go 100% renewable tomorrow and it still wouldn't solve all problems. We need to think more about adaptation because the change is coming. And that is exactly what we're doing here tonight. Again, the city has two concurrent processes going on. They do have a climate action plan, and that's mitigating these greenhouse gas emissions, thinking about how the city can lower their greenhouse gas emissions. And what we're really talking about here is how we can adapt to the already changing climate and perhaps become a little bit more resilient and think about how we can do things better than we're currently doing them. We're seeing mass transit and fewer cars, denser housing like duplexes in suburban areas and more livable urban areas, infrastructure updates and programs to get air conditioning to vulnerable communities, reducing methane emissions, different land use decisions in the WUI, which is the wildland urban interface, ways to make density sexy. Perfect. Keep them coming. I'm going to go ahead and close this question again. I know the city is interested in your thoughts. Please do take that survey number 2. You can continue to type them into the chat if you want to. Our next question is, how should the city prioritize these strategies? What types of things are most important to consider? Are we going to balance cost? Are we going to think more about those ones that have long-term effectiveness? Are we going to kind of prioritize those that have public health and safety at the forefront? Are we going to think about the environmental benefits like the water quality or the air quality? Are we going to think about equity? Are we prioritizing those communities of concern and those who have been typically left behind? Should we really think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Or is there something else we're missing? Is there something else that is important to think about as we think about how these different strategies can be prioritized?
And with this question, you can select up to 3 options, up to 3.
Perfect. And it looks like this one's going to be a little bit tricky. We'll give a little bit more time. There's a lot of them that, have similar support. But we are seeing that cost doesn't seem to be a factor. Obviously, the city and its budgets do need to consider that to some extent, but it looks like folks are really looking towards those solutions that offer long-term effectiveness, other environmental benefits such as water quality or clean air. We call them sometimes co-benefits. Always looking at equity, kind of prioritizing those more vulnerable communities or those communities of concern, followed by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then public health and safety. So that is incredibly interesting results. Thank you so much for sharing those. I know the city will certainly be taking those to heart. Health and safety and priority should always be a priority. But again, we're just looking, there's a lot of factors that go into making these decisions on how to prioritize these strategies. So they're just looking at which one may have a little bit more balance than the others.
Great, thank you so much, Carla. And I love to see all these boxes moving back and forth as you folks choosing your top 3. Very dynamic group. Thank you for participation. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this workshop, and I cannot believe we're towards the end, and I'm gonna let you have dinner exactly at 7:30. We're gonna have some time and space for questions. Naturally, we've seen very active group, a lot of great questions. Naturally, we cannot address them all, but we would like to address several of them, and the rest the city will take a look at, see if they can group them together by themes and follow up with some responses. Okay, let me see what we have here. Some good questions. What tactics will you be analyzing for addressing heat and the urban heat island effect? Such as air conditioning ordinances or shade corridors. What tactics will you be analyzing for addressing heat and the urban heat island effect? Heidi or Julia, can you answer this question, please?
Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, so a range of options. For all of the hazards, there's going to be multiple solutions that need to be implemented. For heat islands, we're looking at a lot of the solutions that would increase green spaces because that has multiple benefits with it and it provides a cooling effect to the surrounding area. So that would be increasing green spaces in parks, improving and enhancing our urban tree canopy. It could also be other items such as green roofs or cool roofs, but we do recognize too that people may just need to have access to air conditioning and they may not have that in their home. So we're also looking at the Cool Zones program, which is existing, but making sure that cool zones are in all areas where communities would need to have access to air conditioning during an extreme heat event. So the answer is not one solution, but a range of different options, really looking at green solutions, but also making sure that community members do have access to cool zones if they need it.
And if I can just add one more thing, the question also, I think, was asking about how are we going to analyze the urban heat island effect? And we do have existing data, but we are excited that we will be partnering with the San Diego Foundation this summer to do a community heat mapping project to get some more detailed information about the really extreme differences up to 20 degrees in different areas of the city, depending on the development patterns. Really, basically, the amount of paving can really affect the urban heat island, and through that effort that we'll be kicking off and looking for community partners to be assisting us using the heat sensors, we'll be able to get that more refined information so that we can tailor the strategies to the areas that will be experiencing the most extreme heat.
Great. We have another great question as it relates to climate adaptation strategies. And Cynthia, thank you for that first question. This one from Don. Do you plan to develop more effective rainwater capture and harvesting strategy to help us capture and use rainwater on the land?
Yeah, I can take that one. So rainwater harvesting and rain barrels is an existing program with our public utilities department. And we've included it as a strategy to look at that program and look at potential expansion from that program. Rainwater harvesting is really beneficial for both flooding and drought. So if you have a flood event and you're capturing that rainwater, that's less water that's running off into the road. So you're reducing that peak flow. And similarly, if you're capturing that rainwater in a drought, you have that for use of watering, your plantings in your yards, and you don't need to be pulling additional water. So we are definitely looking at that as a strategy.
Great, thank you for that. Another question is very specific, and that question is from Gabrielle. Can we plant native milkweed to help the monarch butterflies?
We love milkweed. We actually our team did a team building event. We just planted a bunch of milkweed in Paradise Hills Community Park. But yeah, we do really in the city. We are very acutely aware of a lot of the initiatives. There's a Monarch Butterfly Pledge, which the city has participated in to focus on planting milkweeds. And so in terms of increasing green spaces and all of our initiatives, we do heavily focus on the milkweed because of the benefits to the butterflies. So thank you very much for your question.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. So the next one, what changes do you plan to pursue as part of the city's CAP update planning process? And I know that question is about climate action plan, and we clarified it a little bit. So I wonder if you want to expand a little bit more to provide more clarity. What changes do you plan to pursue as part of the city's CAP update planning process? And if not, where this question can be answered.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So again, the climate action plan is being spearheaded by the sustainability department. Please follow up with Julia or myself, and we can connect you with the right people for the climate action plan process. But then with respect to the climate resiliency planning process, the changes that we plan to pursue, we are going to be planning to release a draft plan, which I think we're going to be going over next step shortly. But this public engagement piece that phase that we're in right now, we are getting public input so that we can see what comprehensive changes we want to include within the plan, but really providing a comprehensive framework to be able to provide strategies to address the climate hazards, and not just any strategies that can provide meaningful benefits to everyday people that live in the city.
Great, thank you so much. The next question.
I'm sorry, Hannah, if I just may add one thing to that, just because the Institute for Local Government is engaged in both of those processes, Dawn. And what I wanted to let you know is from our standpoint, it does look like the city is really putting an emphasis on equity in both of those planning efforts. The city is really looking at ways to have really tangible, implementable strategies that address communities of concern, that are doable, that are obtainable. And so I'm excited about the city's commitment to not just kind of throwing everything into a plan that everyone wants. They're really thinking strategically on how to prioritize things, how to emphasize equity in these plans. And that's the difference that I think you might be alluding to in both planning efforts.
Thank you, Carla. And the next question is actually a perfect segue into our next steps on climate adaptation and resiliency planning. If we can advance to the next slide, please, and I will read the next question. How will this plan be presented, and how will you ensure it's implemented?
I could take that if you want. So the question is, how will the plan be presented?
Yes, and how the city will ensure it's implemented. As we're talking about what's next for community engagement, development of the plan, which you see this information on the slide. The question is how the plan will be presented.
Sure, so as just mentioned, we're in the process of getting feedback on the adaptation strategies to really understand community priorities and help shape the plan. And then we anticipate releasing a draft plan for public review over the summer, and that will be made available to the public and to the community to look at. And then we'll hold another community workshop where we'll really be able to dig into the plan with the community and make sure that, you know, feedback to date was incorporated, and to gather more feedback and input on the plan itself. And then the step after that would be that it needs to go forward to City Council for adoption, and then it would be implemented.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. And I totally outsourced my part reading the slide to you because it was a perfect combination of answering the question and reading the slides. Well, folks, we're at 7:27. We are near the end of our workshop, but this is not the end for community engagement and resilience work that the city is putting forward. We're asking you to take the survey, and we dropped some links earlier in the chat. And once you leave this meeting, the link to the survey is going to pop up on your screen. So please take it now or maybe later. So 42% of you already been on the city's webpage, so you know where to find information. In case you're not familiar, the Adaptation Resilience SD, Resilience San Diego webpage, you see the link on the slide. We would like you to stay informed and receive the updates, and we're going to launch a 30-second Zoom poll to see what is your preference receiving updates from the city, not only about this particular process, adaptation and resilience planning, but overall updates from the city. And I'm going to ask my colleague Nicole to launch a quick Zoom poll, just one question. What is the best way for the city to share information with you on this planning effort? Website, social media, Facebook, social media, Instagram, mailed correspondence, in-person events, newsletter or email, or other. And you can write others in the question and answer box. And if we can see the results. Great. Newsletter or email. 67%, followed by website and social media, Facebook. No one said Instagram. Instagram is not popular anymore.
So just to clarify on the newsletter, pretty much everything is linked off of our webpage there. So you can take the survey off of the webpage. You can see all of the work that we've done to date. And there's a little button at the top where you can sign up for the newsletter. And by doing that, you'll receive, planning updates and know what's coming next and know how to stay involved and continue to give us your feedback.
And maybe we'll include that link where to sign up for the newsletter in the follow-up email, so it's just easier for you. Okay, well, at 7:29, you see Julia's contact information on the screen. If you have any questions, please email Julia. On behalf of the entire ILG team, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening, for being very active. I loved all the activities in the chat. As I mentioned, we did not get to all the questions just because an hour and a half flies by. I see that Erica is back on camera, and I wonder if she wants to say a couple words. In the next 30 seconds, she's saying no.
No, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the City of San Diego for allowing us to help out tonight. And everyone else, we hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Erin. Eddie, thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Good night, everyone.
Guys, go enjoy those desserts. Have a good night.
But not
Bye.
cake. And we can stop interpretation and recording. Thank you.